Hi. Hi, I'm Summer, and then I'm so honored to have these people actually on the same stage with us. Thank you, Richard, and you make us wait, on the stage a little bit. But this is incredible to have this type of mix of AI expert to investors. So we're actually going to talk about some things that we have prepared, but we also want to open questions to, open up the floor and then ask you guys to ask us questions, right? So let's actually make it very interactive. We're not here to, hear something that you can find on a YouTube or in a, ChatGPT will tell you, right? So let's actually make it very interactive. And then based on what we just heard, I want to just get early signals from our panelists to kind of like share some thoughts about the past 12-month observations. Yeah, but anyway, so Anton, do you want to share some thoughts and then we can kind of kick it
The
off?
question again?
So the question was, we just heard some of the observations that we've seen in the past 12 months.
Uh-huh.
And then what's your kind of take on, especially you invest a lot in early stage AI startups, right?
Yeah, I see a lot of creativity can be unfold either by coding or prototyping or, like all the cursors and bolts and lavables, but I can see this happening not just for coding, but like every individual, I think, maybe text forward and image forward and video forward territories. Like it can be for lawyers, it can be for health, it can be for, you can prototype and, scale things that you like, problem space, define it. And I see a lot of amplification for actual creatives, people with ideas, people with minds and hearts and taste to apply it to the world, make it real. That's what I hope to see.
Anybody else want to add from your recent AI investment or experiences in the past, especially past the recent times?
Maybe just one word. So thank you very much for having me on this panel first. So I'm based in France and I'm looking more at the European ecosystem. What I think is really striking compared to what we've seen in the past maybe 10 years is the pace of change. I think the rhythm of incremental improvement, progress is just totally crazy. So I think, I was not an investor all my life. I was in government, so I had a totally different life before. But I think for those of you who've been in the investment space for a long time, I think this pace, the rhythm of the technological change and the impact. So you were talking about business cases, use cases, which are not really there yet. But I think the pace of change and the way this revolution is going to impact the way we live, the way we work, the way we learn, the way we communicate, I think is going to be unheard of. So that's my take.
So I think there are a couple of things that we can talk about what happened with the AI in the past 12 years. I think that there are a lot of questions that we ask among ourselves in Silicon Valley. And one of the most recent questions was about like, are we in bubble? And like, I think he mentioned, Richard mentioned that we're not. But I think the kind of if you think about mechanism of bubble, if there is a mismatch between demand and supply, there is a bubble, right? And I think a lot of people see the potential of AI as a technology, how transformative it is, and it's how broadly it's going to impact our businesses and the way we live. And people see that and want a part of that transformation, and so there's a massive demand to get into those companies and invest in those technologies. But however, by definition, the supply is limited because there are only a limited number of developers, limited number of companies that are actually going to last for the coming decades. So when there is a mismatch, there's a appetite of the capital who want to go into these companies versus the supply. I think there is inevitably there is a lot of bubble, and it kind of create a lot of interesting kind of phenomena that's it's overvaluation, hyped valuation, and also like supporting companies found by like researchers who don't have any business experience. So I think those companies are also valued like ultra high. And I think all those things will be normalized over the next 12 years. They will go back to building companies that are actually delivering real value and solving real business problems, than like showcasing some kind of novelty and interesting applications of this technology.
So I'll add to that from an investor's perspective. So I'm part of a Korean-based venture capital firm, but I run the US office for them. And so if you think about the AUM, or the assets under management for our firm, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars range. And for those types of VCs over in the US, we are faced with a big, even existential question of where do we go? In 2024, last year, there was approximately, I think, $330 or so billion of venture investment all over the world, and about $100 billion went into the US, and some similar amount into AI globally. And so AI is very concentrated, US is very concentrated. Of the $100 billion that went into the AI space, I think 70 billion went into 6 deals over 5 companies. And I think these 5 companies are OpenAI, Anthropic, possibly, I think XAI, they raised twice last year. Perplexity maybe one. And they raise enormous amounts of capital. And unless you're running a VC firm with billions or tens of billions of dollars under management, this leaves a huge sort of a head-scratching question for the rest of us. And so then my day-to-day question is, where do I invest? I mean, we have to play in AI. There's the bubble issue. There's the concentration issue. Where do I go? And so maybe perhaps later on we talk about where we're looking into, and I can go more into what we're looking at. But just lastly on the bubble, I think it's probably safe to say that there is a bubble in the AI space. But does that mean that it's going to pop anytime soon? And if it's not, then what do? You have to keep investing in it, right? And second of all, it seems that at least in the US, the VC/PE industry has enough capital to be able to absorb huge valuations. And so you can keep investing in private companies. And even in the public space, there are a number of companies where the market cap is over $1 trillion, right? So even if you wait and watch and invest in the number 1 company that's over $1 billion in valuation, you can still do 1,000x, assuming that they go public, right? So these are some thoughts.
Actually, at this point, we kind of like talked about, the recent observation and some like take on it. Actually, any questions from the audience? I know Koreans not good at asking questions, but I'm gonna push you, okay? Any questions that you guys may have? This is a rare opportunity, come on, right? Any questions? Okay, so I'm gonna ask you again, so think about questions, okay? All right, so then, so Michael brought up, so where do we invest? So Anton and I work very closely. So we actually met at WhatsApp, company called WhatsApp, you guys know? Because I'm in a Katok, country, but WhatsApp is very popular elsewhere. It's a messaging app. And then we scale the product, and it's used by over 3 billion users worldwide, right? So that's where we met. And then for us at StratMinds, we look at, especially, because we are focused on apply AI, looking at products where it actually will bring a lot more richer experiences for people. Because it's the kind of like still beginning of, development for AI. And then, a lot of companies that, Michael mentioned is a very, popular, OpenAI, Anthropic, and those experiences still very wall of text type of experience, and you're getting a lot of text input and output. So we are trying to look at how can this experience be better and more meaningful and delightful. So that's kind of like the experience that we've been looking at, because we believe in where the winners of AI race will be, defined by great experience, like product experience and things that people actually get to experience and feel better at what they do. So we look at a lot of use cases.
So,
yeah,
I don't know. I may ask a few questions for people, because I think one of the questions in this year is like, how can countries, regions win in this AI game, or at least play? And I have a question for people here. Some represent Korean interests, some represent European interests, some represent, like more global perspective. I wonder if you have to make just one move, be it data or energy or inference or talent or capital, whatever it is, one move. What do you make to make your region win, or at least be a competitive player in the AI game? And what is it for you?
So a lot of people compare the AI to introduction of internet like 20, 30 years ago, because the transformative impact is comparable to that. You cannot imagine business that doesn't have any presence on internet today. Every businesses have like their website. You can email, you can use email for communication, etc. Similarly, I think AI will have such a fundamental transformative impact. What Korea did 20, 30 years ago was as a government, we focused on making sure that we have the fastest broadband that connects the whole country. The government was very conscious about deploying internet so that people who cannot pay for the subscription have access to it by making it available through those regional kind of centers. And I think that allowed Korean businesses and entrepreneurs build applications and services on top of it, use their creativity and entrepreneurship to make Korea the most innovative country for the next coming decade. I think some similar investment is needed at this time to deploy the infrastructure that's needed as a government. Those are the things like access to the energy and data center and the models. And we also talk about sovereign AI. I think it's a software, so it's kind of some people think it's kind of against the market dynamics. But imagine that AI is going to be used for very mission critical applications such as defense. Do you want to rely on a model that was built by people with a very different interest than in our own government? So I think that kind of speaks to the need that we need to have access to technology and a model that can be used for those mission critical applications and purposes. So I think those are the things that we have to be very conscious about, instead of how we can deploy the infrastructure so that business can flourish on top of it, and how we can maintain our national interest by making sure that we have access to those technology.
I totally agree with what was just said, and I think the challenge both for private companies and for states, governments right now is that the amount of investment needed to create these infrastructures that you talked about is so huge, and the fiscal situation of many countries, my country is an example, France, but many other countries are in the same situation, is sometimes such that only actually private corporations with very deep pockets can invest that money and expect returns that will come in maybe dozens of years. So a lot of money has been poured into this AI. First of all, it was LLM, the competition for LLMs. And this is very costly because you need to buy a lot of GPUs from NVIDIA, but also the talent that we were mentioning, the problem of talent. So there's a limited number of supply of talents. And I recently heard the statistics, I cannot quote where it came from, but that the big techs, the American big techs, so Meta, Google, they multiplied by 10 the compensations for developers and engineers in the past 12 months or 24 months maybe. So how can, challenging or startups, or even if they're well-funded, how can they compete, when people are paid 10 times more at Google, even though the job is not as interesting or as, exciting? It's very difficult to refuse to be paid 10 times more in a big company where you have the comfort and the security. So I think this challenge of financing this infrastructure is huge, because governments should do it when it's not immediately profitable, but then governments cannot do it because of their fiscal or budgetary situation. So that's the first big issue. And as you were saying, I think compared to the internet, probably there was this challenge as well when in the first wave of the internet, that sovereignty was something very important. But with Gen AI, I think when you think of the impact of Gen AI applications. I think in health it will be amazing. In research for bio and new treatments, it's amazing. But when you think of the way you can manipulate algorithm to intervene in democracies, to intervene to have micro detrimental actions on the mental health of young generations. So I think the potential danger of these technologies nowadays has never been as huge as it is today. And so if there's not a way for governments to monitor the ethical framework of the use cases of this Gen AI, then I think democracy is in danger, humankind is in danger. And so I think this sovereign AI issue is really very critical, much more critical, I would say, than in the first waves of the internet.
While Michael is going to answer, I'm going to ask you one more time for questions. So prepare so that we can, come on, Koreans, we can do this, okay? So Michael, add your point, and then.
Okay, I'll give you enough time to think.
Yeah.
You don't have to listen to me talk. So at my apartment in San Francisco, I have a vacuum cleaner robot that's made by a country that competes with the United States. And while I was staying here, my wife wanted to make sure that our place was safe from theft and fire and all that stuff. And so we turned on the app and started make it go around the apartment just to watch, if there's any intruders. And then my wife reminded me, the president of the country in which the robot was made might be watching.
Yeah.
And so sovereign AI is very important because of that. Just going back to your question, Anton, I think your question was, what is one thing you might do for sovereign AI if you're in a...
Yeah, for your region to be at least competitive.
So I'm also Korean. I spent some time living in Korea when I was little. When I look at Korea, I don't have a precise answer. It's for a country that's relatively advanced, I think it's very strange things happen here, right? This is one country where Google search doesn't get used as much as all the other countries. Google Maps is not used. We use Kakao, and we don't use Slack or WhatsApp or iMessage. I think Korea has its own word processor, and so Korean-made documents are globally incompatible. And I think it speaks to the various contextual differences that are unique here. The culture, the way that we're brought up, the way that we work, the way that we interact with each other. There's sort of Confucian culture embedded in the workplace and in society. So all of those need to be taken into account when we build our own AI models. And I think that's where we can have our, highly performant AI that works for the setting that we're in. I think that might be one opportunity we have. It's niche. I mean, it's probably not scalable on a global scale, but I think it's necessary.
And I think it's data that comes from the surfaces that users touch, which is pretty unique to Korea, I guess, because you have so many consumer players that have this very unique data. You can actually use it to build better models, better experiences, and better chances to win. So that's kind of what I see here.
So the time has come, okay? So I mean, guys, I'm actually prepping you because the next session, we're talking about AI and creativity and media space. They're also going to do fireside chat. So I'm kind of prepping for the next one so you guys can have the question muzzle. Anyway, so any questions that you want to ask? 한국말로 하셔도 됩니다. 네, 편하신 말로 아무거나. Okay, yes. So 한국말도 되고 다 하시니까 좀 여쭤보세요. 네, okay. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna be first.
Okay.
So thanks for your great introduction of the AI. But as you know, we announced our government set up the plan for the invest in 100 trillion won in the foundation models. Mm-hmm. So as you know, we have already existing the big company like AI, like Google's, Meta's, other ones, OpenAI. So let's if we end up developed our Korean foundation models very successfully, but already existing super company developed another new stage one. So how do we compete with this, situations? Even we made up our new Korean foundation model successfully. So that's my first questions. So to our foundation model successful, what do we consider to be the successful? And the second one is when we end up making the new foundation models. So you mentioned that applied AI. So other Korean companies, what do we prepare for in line with successful Korean foundation models? There's my two questions.
Okay, so who wants to take the very specific country foundation model and how do you compete?
So I think you already have some LLMs developed here in Korea. Naver is developing one with a Hyperclova. So maybe it's not at par with the OpenAI and the Anthropic, but it is one. And also, what we were saying about the bubble is that a lot of money has been invested in creating these models that are now starting to be a bit commoditized. I mean, there's still a lot of money and a lot of new developments. I don't know if you saw the new movie that was created by OpenAI. It's called I don't remember what the name, but so the risk, I think, if you start too late, and it was the experience in Europe when, at some point, Google was already totally dominant, as a search engine in Europe. And then some people said, oh, we need to create our own search engine. It was like 10 years after, Google already had taken all the market shares. That's too late, and it's money wasted. So probably at some point, the best strategy is to partner with some other countries with whom you share some values, because the risk to rely only on Chinese or American is that, you can see the geopolitical situation change overnight, and so if you don't want to depend upon countries who can become, not necessarily enemies, but, with whom the trust can be broken in very rapidly, then probably it's best to create collaborations with other countries that share similar kind of values, political values or intellectual values, and try to share the burden of the investment, and then to work a lot on the inference models, because inference models are less expensive to develop. And also, I must say that probably one of the very important moments was a DeepSeek moment, because we're not sure exactly, but what we understood from what happened in China is that they managed to develop an LLM with, was it 10 times or 100 times less resources?
Just 10 million.
Than OpenAI. So probably, this is maybe part of this commoditization, but maybe it's also possible to allocate less resources to obtain the same results for foundation models, as shown by DeepSeek in China. So the combination of these two facts, I think, should lead governments who feel that they're a bit late to focus on, international collaborations, and also to inference, model to deal with applications, applied AI, and use cases. That's my 5 cents.
So I think there are many ways to look at that question. As I briefly mentioned, AI is this foundation models and AI infrastructure is gonna be used in so many things, including mission critical things such as defense, as I mentioned. Do you want to use Chinese LLM in operating our fighter jet? That's a question. If we don't have a model, I think that we have to be relying on someone else's model, because if we don't, it's not going to be very competitive. It's like having a nuclear nuke in the country. Some countries do have, some countries don't. It's okay not to have it, but they have a different type of voice at the international table. So I think it's very mission critical for us to be a leader in this space going forward to sustain our economic competitiveness in this environment. So it's not a matter of choice. I think it's a matter of how we have to think about how we can get there.
And then
It's like not having language. So, for example, and on top of that, a lot of the, I mean, we all invest in a lot of vertical AI companies that are working on finance, insurance, accounting, all of this based on like using APIs that connect to these LLM models. What are those APIs optimized for? Optimized for US standard, because it was built based on US framework. Flori mentioned that it's going to have fundamental implications to democracy because of the value that's propagated when you ask questions. You ask questions like value kind of nuanced questions. And LLM, all these models that was built based on the data and a kind of the philosophy in different countries will answer based on those beliefs. It's not going to prioritize our own cultural beliefs. So I think that's the kind of implications that if we don't have a model and if we don't have a capability to build upon those models.
My short addition to this one, I think, okay, you don't own the model right now. Okay, so what can you do? I think you can probably try to build some tooling and framework that sit above. Like you can probably own fine tuning for sure. That's much cheaper, much easier. You can probably own evals to kind of like, see which models, are better compatible with your country interests and whatever. And I think kind of like using something that's, you can at some critical moments switch models without losing your, because I think that eventually models will be more open source. Like it's still catching up. You can see Kimi catching up, some other countries catching up a little bit, not kind of like to the level of OpenAI or Anthropic, but getting there. So I see if you cannot own the model, like own everything else that kind of like protect you on the layers above it.
Okay. So do you have a follow-up question? Oh, okay, and then we're gonna move on to another lady.
Okay, so Ms. Yu mentioned that the sovereign AI models, but what about instead of inventing their own sovereign models, we're gonna use the open source models. So we don't need to consider like the safety and security concerns. I mean, we can use the open source in AI models.
Yes, I think a lot of the companies rely on open source models, and oftentimes they fine tune on top of the open source models. But open source models is already trained with certain set of data, so that has a strong preference. And also, like all these open source providers, such as like, for example, like Meta, recently, I mean, I think it's with the establishment of Superintelligence Lab, we think that they're not going to be as proactive in sharing their open source models, and Llama model has been the most popular open source model in the world. So we're kind of dependent on someone else's decision how we're going to open source or share, and also those are not like technically open source, they're open weight models. There's a little bit of difference because they don't really share what kind of data data that they use to train those models. So yes, we can. So I think it's a kind of it's not a black and white answer, but I think it's. We just need to think about where we want to get, what kind of control that we want to ensure.
I was in a different panel yesterday that kind of talked about that. One recommendation or thought that came out from that was open source models are generally okay and good enough for, let's say, consumer-wide applications or things that are trained on publicly available data, so that you're trying to get quick facts or knowledge, and the downside of being wrong is not too significant. Whereas closed source models, would probably be a better choice to go if you are dealing with proprietary data or mission critical tasks and so forth. So that was one like hybrid approach that came out.
And so you can implement, so I was mentioning, collaboration. So it doesn't mean necessarily intergovernmental collaborations, but maybe you saw in the news that Mistral, so our French decacon, we're very proud of this company. It's people who were actually in the US working for Meta, Google, who came back to create the company in France, and they just raised more than 1.5 billion US dollar. Reaching a valuation of 14 billion. So their model is, when you compare, the performance of this model compared to ChatGPT or Claude, etc., is quite good. It's called Le Chat. It's an open source model, and this company, as you were saying, I think the chance of Korea or Asian, speaking countries is that I think the performance of American trained models is not very good when it comes to Asian cultures, because the data sets were not good quality, and it's very difficult to have good data sets. And so, you could totally imagine that a company like Mistral comes to Korea and has a deal with maybe Naver. I know it's the fiction, it doesn't exist, but and exchange and have an agreement to exchange data sets so that Le Chat becomes very good in Korean and very relevant when it comes to Korean prompts, for example, which would not be the case with the chats that have not been trained with good data. So there is still a way, and you don't necessarily need, even for mission critical models, you don't necessarily need hundreds of billions of parameters, even for defense missions. You need mapping, you need, to have the repository of all the weapons or something, and the chains of commands, but you don't need to know how to make coffee or something. So I think, closed inference models that are very well trained with relevant data sets is a way maybe also to protect local sovereignty.
This is a very hot topic, and I'm sure it's very, is evolving, but it is true that it's not black and white. And then as everybody said here, like we need to develop, like for instance, for Korea, like the cultural sensitivity, the language, almost like it's our own, word and language, and how do we do that best? And Koreans can do the best for Korean, aspects of it, right? So I think this dialogue will continue, but we have less than 4 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we're getting the additional questions. My goal was getting 3 questions, so this is going really well. So we'll move to the lady in black and then ask the questions.
Hi, thank you for friendly fireside chat. It is very helpful. I'm Hyun-hee Park from KB Financial Group. So my question, the answer for my question would be very quick and easy. So I found some similarity between the current AI boom and Californian gold rush in mid 1800s. I guess like two of most beneficiaries in the gold rush period actually were mining equipment providers and also like gene makers like Levi's. So, but in that regards, can you provide us like who are the equipment providers for AI companies other than NVIDIA? And I hope you share with us like unfamiliar names, like which can be potential beneficiary of these AI booms.
Oh, wow. How much do we have? 3 minutes, okay. It's not a quick question. Yeah.
But again, I think, I'm being a bit corporate, but I have invested in a company, I think it's a Korean company, it's called Rebellions. This company is manufacturing chips, so it wants to be a competitor to NVIDIA, not to provide chips to run LLMs, foundation models, but to run inference models.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite smart not to go, upfront against NVIDIA, because that would be very challenging, but to find a way to be a good number 2 or on a market that will be booming is, I think, a good strategy. And this company was also founded by Korean, founders who went to the US and who came back to create the company in Korea. So, it's the same as Mistral. So I think it's quite nice to see that, some people have this probably sensitivity to sovereign AI and are keen to create value in the country where they were born. So maybe they would. I wish that they could become winners.
And I think if you look at the traditional distribution of investment, right now it's like this, where most money comes to the inference and chips layer, NVIDIA. And usually over time, if you look at the cloud or like previous hype cycles, you start with this pyramid, but then eventually it reverses. And the vertical, like most top layer, which is, I think, verticalized applications eventually capture more value over time. So like you see like Adobe's or everyone else's capture much more of the value rather than hyperscalers or energy. So kind of like, over time you cannot capture that much of the value from the very bottom layer. So like if you as a player get in short feedback loops with your users and get the better data with your users, you can like build better experiences. And that's how we see it. So like eventually you will be able to capture like much more and not be NVIDIA. You don't have to fight with NVIDIA. You have to fight for users where they come and try to use whatever you build. And from the recent examples, OpenAI tried to buy Windsurf. And this is exactly the same place. They didn't have the coding as like they were losing to Anthropic with coding. So like they tried to get the surface because they have 400 million users of actual coders. So they tried to get to this layer to be able to get this short kind of like feedback from actual engineers to train the models better. So like that's how I see it. Like try to go somewhere where you already have the mode, you already have the connection with the users, build something for them, get their feedback, improve the models that you use as a background, and then this is where I can win, I think.
So we had only 20 seconds left, but I actually had a request that we actually have one more question from the audience. So is it? Yes. Okay, so one more question and we're going to close. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
To save time, let me speak in Korean. 지금 AI가 상용화된다고 가정했을 때 저희가 생각하면 혹시 데이터를 가진 회사들이 이 경기에서 좀 주도권을 잡을 수 있지 않을까라는 상상을 해봅니다. 이게 시장이 데이터를 가지고 있다고 생각하니까요. 그런 관점에서 데이터로 또 전환하기 위해서 상당히 힘든 면들이 많다고 생각하는데요. 그 투자를 하시는 부분에 있어서 그런 AI를 제공하는 그 AI라는 인스트루먼트를 주는 회사 말고 데이터를 가진 회사들의 중요성 그리고 그런 회사들이 앞으로 어떻게 인볼브 될 수 있는지에 대해서 말씀 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
The question. Oh gosh, I'm gonna translate the question. But that
I
was
think
long.
they get real-time translation.
Oh, they get
Yeah.
okay. Oh, whew. Yeah, I tried to. Okay, so quick answers. So, do you want to go?
So I think it's a very interesting point. People say that data can be a moat, for some of the companies, but think about what happened with the introduction of the smartphones. Photos that were taken by individual users exploded when you gave smartphones in hands of those consumers. Data that have been produced so far is less than the data that are going to be produced going forward. We have a lot more like sensors, and also like a data produced in the past was not produced with the purpose of training models. A lot more data are being produced purposefully to train certain models. So your answer to your question is both yes and no. Data is very important. Good quality data is very critical. I mean, it's like when we talk about like why OpenAI is so competitive, and there are many the reasons why, and one of the reasons is they were able to find good quality data early on. It was used for training. That's why like a lot of the researchers compare different models and similar approaches and similar algorithm. But as long as it's the algorithmic difference doesn't make much difference versus the data quality difference. The data quality determines the quality of model a lot more. So the quality of data is very important. But at the same time, going forward, there will be more ways to produce the data to train purpose-built applications and models. So I think it's being very mindful about what kind of data is going to be used, what application we're building, and collect data for that purpose is going to be a very important skill set.
Since we are running out of time, do you want to say something? Okay.
10 seconds.
Yeah, 10 seconds, yes.
Okay, I think that the data that's really
Yeah.
I think that the data that's really useful lives in the organization. So in the context of enterprise AI, so we invest in enterprise AI a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to get the useful data to train these models that'll be very performant in the context of the particular enterprise customers and organizations. So I don't know how to solve that problem. It's not a scalable problem so far. But I think what's important is there are many data management and data transformation companies out there that are very valuable for that reason, because they help bring out those, deeply buried and proprietary data into the AI systems that get deployed inside of those enterprises. So Databricks is one example, and they've acquired many startup companies.
Actually, this is a very interesting point. Just to wrap it up, is that like at StratMinds, we started about 8 years ago, and then the first set of company were actually who is going to collect those data well to get into that next level. Even though we're apply AI company, we have to look at a lot of places. They're actually going to be start collecting data and then help that transformation. But we also in a meeting room many times and talking about, are you gonna wash your dirty laundry or are you gonna buy new clothes? So that's another like discussion that we have. Like you don't really need to have exactly a lot of data, but it's about like how Song mentioned that how we actually gonna collect data going forward and how we're gonna do that. So this is a discussion that we hear a lot. And then I'm glad that you guys, one of the person asking, we talked about it. But stay tuned. We'll be back, in next year or somewhere else, so that we can actually continue with this dialogue. And then a lot of them are very relevant. As I mentioned, this data, quality discussion has been going on for a while, right? So I'm hoping that this is keep going to go through evolutions, and then the quality of discussion that we are having in Korea is also evolving. So I'm very happy to be here again. And then, please stay for the next session. We're actually going to get some really awesome founders. They're doing this amazing work, AI, media, and creative space. So yeah, so we'll wrap. But thank you so much for the questions that you gave us. And then I really appreciate our panelists. So thank you.